Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. If you're afraid of being salesy and pushy when promoting your business, you will not want to miss this episode. I'm here with Chandler Walker. Chandler started his entrepreneurial journey after graduating from the University of Nevada, Reno, with a degree in biochemistry and foregoing a medical pathway to pursue a brick and mortar wellness facility. He then pivoted to an online health practice a year before the COVID lockdowns. After scaling both businesses to the seven-figure level and doing over 3,000 sales consultations, Chandler was frustrated with the way sales were taught. He was tired of the old school objection handling, aggressive tactics, and salesy attitude taught by most sales trainers. And that's when he created Compassion Conversations, a therapeutic driven, psychological based sales system centered around compassion and care. Ethical selling is a topic I care a lot about, and I know selling is something that many new entrepreneurs struggle with. So I cannot wait to dive into this conversation. Chandler, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. Super excited to talk about the simple three-step strategy that you can use to sell without manipulation, aggressive tactics, or just feeling salesy or gross about it.
Yes, I love it. All right, first, tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so basically, our business has two fronts. We have the wellness business, which is still up and running and crushing it. And we have the sales consultancy, which is under the culture of care umbrella. And so both of those are kind of what we're running. Who I am, I grew up with a bipolar mom. And so as a young kid, I had to learn how to communicate in like a neutral
Mm,
way. And I think a lot of people don't recognize how challenging that is. Because as a
yeah.
kid, if you're in that environment, you end up hating or distrusting or holding animosity towards someone who's suffering. And I recognized young that if I could communicate in a neutral way, so if she was up on a high or on a low, and I could communicate neutrally, I could walk her off the cliff and move her toward neutral. And that became
Mm,
a really powerful skill that led me to a med school pathway.
wow. So I know that I think right out of college, right, you went into entrepreneurship. You decided not to pursue the traditional medical pathway, right?
Yeah, and what happened was I got into the medical pathway, and ultimately we didn't really figure out what was going on with my mom until my 20s. And I wanted to get into
Mm,
medical school to maybe be the catalyst for change to help people recreate their lives. But the problem was when I got in, I felt like what I was doing was we'd talk to someone and provide medication, and then that was it. That was the perpetual cycle. It was a
mhm,
medicated cycle, a band-aid cycle, if you will. And I didn't feel good about that. It's not what I got into the game for, and it's not a shot at doctors. It's the system. You can't tell
yeah,
someone to eat an apple because they're not going to eat the apple. They just want the pill. And
mhm,
that's what led me to break off and open up my brick and mortar. And lucky enough, I had a father who was an entrepreneur, and so he had a siding and windows construction business. And so I kind of from a young age watched him go to customers' houses, went to his office, and he bribed me every time with a donut and orange juice. Otherwise, I never would have gone. But I think that gave me a little bit of the confidence to go and pursue this entrepreneurial pathway.
yeah, I mean, that's a pretty big leap to take kind of that early in your career. Obviously, I did pretty much the same thing, so I get it. But did you ever kind of second guess that decision to just jump into entrepreneurship, or like looking back, would you have done anything differently?
Yeah, I think looking at it, I second guess myself quite a bit. Like, can I do this? Am I able to do this? On the one side, I was helping people manage and run their gyms, sort of like a part time job during college.
Mhm.
So at least I had that experience. So that gave me that little push. And I think the fact that my father was an entrepreneur gave me a little bit of that push as well. Even though he looked at me in the eye and said, "Chandler, don't do this. Don't be an entrepreneur. It's too much work. You're going to work 24/7. Just go work for the post office and retire after 20 years."
Yeah.
Obviously, I didn't listen to him.
Yeah. And then how did you end up kind of pivoting into the sales consulting side? What drove you here?
Yeah, good question. So I tend to get into my own madness, and my own madness becomes creating new things, the
Mhm.
ultimate entrepreneurial endeavor. So the first thing we did was we created the six pillars of wellness around our wellness business. So mental health, social health, sleep, nutrition, fitness, habits. And I had to sell that myself. And it wasn't a cheap program. I think in the beginning it was somewhere around $1,500 for 3 months to work with us, which
Mm-hmm.
is pretty expensive in the business consumer world. And then
Yeah.
it ultimately ended up being around 3,200. So I had to learn to sell this thing on my own. And I was okay selling it in the beginning, but then I started hiring coaches, and the coaches were telling me, oh, you need to stab them with the knife and twist them. You need to, if they cry, they buy. And I got
Yeah.
all of these horrifying things that just didn't align with me. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought to myself, I built this business to make people better, to make them well. I left another pathway because I felt disenfranchised. And now I'm in a position to where I need to manipulate, strong arm, and be aggressive towards other people to make them well. I feel
Yeah.
like I'm living a lie.
Yeah.
And so that's what led me to begin building out the Compassion Conversations sales program.
Okay, I love it, and I can't wait to dive in. So, my first question is, are there any kind of sales myths that you want to debunk right away? And I think you already touched on some of them, right? This idea that you have to be aggressive, you have to kind of strong arm people into selling. Any other kind of myths that people, when you think of selling, when you think of a salesperson, what usually comes to mind?
Yeah, I think when people think of a salesperson, they think of like Leonardo DiCaprio in Wolf of Wall Street, or they think of Glenn Gary Ross, always be closing, brass balls. But I think in reality, it's not like that, and it doesn't need to be like that. In today's world, we're moving into an era of relationship-based sales, and to
Mhm.
build a relationship, you have to be able to listen. And so I think one of the biggest myths of sales in general is that you have to be an extrovert. And in my
Mm.
opinion, introverts are way better at sales because they can actually sit back and listen, and then they can respond with very few words, just enough to make sure that the prospect understands that you are listening.
Mhm. I love to hear you say that. I'm an introvert. Most of my clients, if not all of them, are introverts. And I think that's such a big misconception is that you need to be extroverted or that selling is all about like you talking. Because my sales calls as a coach are like 90% the other person's talking. I'm listening to what they're telling me they're struggling with, what they're telling me they need and what they want. Um and some of the easiest sales I've ever closed, which I don't even really like using that term, but some of the easiest sales I've ever made, I did almost no talking. So it really is this big misconception. Any others that come to mind?
Yeah, I think the next one is it doesn't have to be this dog and pony show to where it's like,
Mm,
here's all the features, here's all the benefits, here's
yeah.
what we can do for you. Are you in? Are you out? Let's assume the close. Give me your Visa or MasterCard.
Mhm.
I think what it needs, what it really is it's beginning is listening, and then it's telling someone what they need and how you can help them.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest misconceptions is you have to have this like big, crazy pitch. But
Mhm.
I teach my clients your pitch should be no more than 2 minutes. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you've told people too much. They're going to want to think about it, and it's a disaster.
Yeah. Okay. So why is it that you don't agree with a lot of those traditional sales tactics?
Yeah, I think the problem with traditional sales tactics is they push people away. And when you
Mhm.
look at the dynamics of the human relationship, if I come at you and I'm like, what can I do to get you to buy today?
Yeah.
How about we get you started right now? Hey, are you interested? Let's do this. You're going to push away and you're not going to want it as much because you're going to look at me and say, wow, this guy's got commission breath. And I
Mhm.
personally experienced this. I went to buy a car the other day. Actually, this is a while back. And the guy walks up and he looks at me and he says, first words, never said anything else. What can I get you to buy a car today? And I was like, I guess ask better questions.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I think it's so easy to tell the difference between someone actually caring about what you're struggling with or why you're in front of them, like what is it that you need versus they're just trying to make a commission or close a sale, right? And I'm sure everyone listening can think of those experiences too. It's like those aggressive people in the middle of the mall in those kiosks that like run up to you when you're just walking by versus when you're just having a conversation. Like I almost think of it like dating. Like you wouldn't immediately approach a person and be like, "Hey, I want to marry you," right? Like that's not going to work. They're going to be pushed away by that. So it
Yeah.
really is about building relationships like you said, and I think dating is just such a good metaphor for selling because when it's about building that relationship with that person, you're building trust with them, you're getting to know what it is that they need. And it just becomes so much easier, in my opinion, to I don't know a better term than say close the sale, but you know what I mean. To
Yeah.
build on that relationship and for it to be mutually beneficial for both of you.
Yeah, and I think that's what's important. That's a good point because if it's not mutually beneficial, then there's no
Mhm.
reason for the person to enroll. And if they do, you're going to get refund requests. And that's the big
Yeah.
problem with traditional sales. If you strong arm someone, if you push someone, if you manipulate someone, they might make the decision in the moment because you manipulated their emotions. But
Mm.
then 2 days later, they're going to come back and say, "Hey, I don't think this is for me. Hey, I want a refund. Hey, I just don't think I'm ready." And that's not their fault.
Yeah.
A lot of people come back and they're like, "Oh, well, you committed to this. This is your blah
Mhm.
blah blah." But in reality, it's your fault. If you strong arm them, if you force them to make a decision, and you get that refund request, it's time to reflect back on your process and see where that screwed up.
Yeah, that's such a good point too, and it's so clear to see when, like, the only thing that person cares about is what they're gonna get out of it and the commission or sale or whatever they're getting, and I think the way that you approach it, the questions that you ask, and framing it in terms of how can you help that person and what do they need, it automatically kind of flips that script and makes them, I'd say, instantly trust you more, which is huge. So in your experience, what sales tactics are more effective than these traditional ones?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, what I kind of did was I took the idea of our mental health curriculum in our wellness business, which was consisting of cognitive behavior therapy, acceptance commitment therapy, motivational interviewing, and a bunch of other psychotherapeutic modalities. And I said, okay, how can we adapt this and make this work with sales? And I was lucky enough to have a good friend who was a doctor in clinical psychology who kind of introduced me to more books and ideas and concepts and solidified my knowledge and understanding of where it was at. And turns out the way I was communicating with my mother was sort of a way to communicate in terms of CBT. So then I took that and I put it into the sales system. And it
Mm,
came down to one of the biggest pillars that we have is become a level 5 listener. Or I used to call it a cognitive questioner, but people didn't understand what cognitive means. So now we call it a
yeah.
level 5 listener. So what that means is the most important aspect of your sales process is discovery. It's asking strategic questions with a purpose, not just to find the pain, but to understand the pain so you can take them from the external statement, like, AK, I want to lose weight, I need leads, into the internal belief.
Mhm.
I'm insecure. I hate myself. I don't want to be naked in front of my husband. Or if I don't get leads, I'm going to lose my mortgage and my kids are going to be homeless. Those are the real reasons we want to
Yeah.
understand. And then our goal isn't to just keep poking them and keep attacking that pain. What we want to do is we want to connect the dots to the past to understand the triggers that have manifested and created problems along the way that are creating inconsistent success or a constant failure for them.
Mm,
And so then what we've essentially done is created a roadmap through strategic questioning to help them understand the problem isn't here, it's actually over here. And usually this is something someone has never thought about. They don't recognize or understand this could possibly be a problem. And that leads us to this position to where now they trust us. They want us to help them, and you get this response of, "I've never thought of it that way. I don't even know what to do. What what would you recommend?"
yeah, yeah, that's such a good point, and I think something that's so important to hear because no matter what it is you're doing, there's always a deeper reason why somebody wants your product or service, right? It solves a problem for them, and a lot of times that problem can run pretty deep. Like, it's never surface level, "I wanna lose weight because I wanna lose weight." There's always so much going on internally for that person, and once you can really get there, it becomes like an emotional connection that they have, and if they feel comfortable enough sharing that with you, that means that you've built trust with them, and that really is kind of that pivotal point of a sales conversation, I think. So do you have any questions that you can ask in order to really get to that point with someone?
Yeah, it's basically a series of questioning. And what we do is we lead someone from high level questions into deeper questions as they give us answers. So
Mm,
if you say you open the call and it's about weight loss, hey, what brings you to the call today? Oh, I want to lose 10 pounds. Oh, yeah, makes sense. I think that's a solid goal, but what makes you want to lose 10 pounds? I ask a question based off a question, based off a question, based off a
mm,
question. Doesn't have to be this outlandish, crazy thing with like magic questions. It's just, I want to lose 10 pounds. Well, why do you want to lose 10 pounds? Oh, because I want to look good in a bikini. Oh, cool. I'd love to look good in a bikini. But what makes a bikini important to you?
yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, I want to be able to go to the beach and not feel embarrassed. Oh, gotcha. So what would make you feel embarrassed at the beach? I'm going deeper and deeper and
Mm,
deeper and deeper till I figured out the level of insecurity that exists. And then I can connect the dots and move to the past to recognize how long this has been a problem.
yeah. Ugh, I love it so much. So tell us a little bit more about compassion conversations and what is this sales system that you've created?
Yeah, so compassion conversations is our psychotherapeutic model of sales, basically what I'm talking about. And it comes down to three big pillars. Pillar one is detaching from the need to sell.
Mm,
So if you come in guns blazing and you need money, you're not going to get the money. People are going to run
yeah.
away. But if you come in and it appears that you don't need it, even if you do need the money, if it appears that you don't need it, if you pull back a little, then people are going to want it more and they're going to lean in. Like when I finish my sales conversations, I tell people, okay, that's all I have for you today.
Mhm.
What do you want to go? Where do you want to go from here? And they'll stop for a second and say, "Wait, can I buy this thing? I don't know. I guess if that's what you really want, are you sure you want it?"
Yeah.
So I always tell them, "I will fight you to make sure you don't buy it because I'm
Mm,
so detached that they want it so much more." And the second pillar is what I talked about a second ago, the level 5 listening. And then our third pillar is what I call becoming a challenging leader. And that's ultimately how we handle objections before they become a problem. And this whole thing's encompassed in a 9-week curriculum. So what we do is in compassion conversations, it's not a course, it's a coaching program. So we can make sure people master the
mhm.
communication modalities to be successful. So they'll go through each segment and they'll go through segment one. We have a complete 9-step framework. They'll go through the first step and then they have to submit their work. They have to submit a video of them doing it with some other human being or themselves in front of the mirror. We'll green light it and say, hey, you're good to go. Go to lesson two. Or we'll say, hey, work on this, and then resubmit. So that way they actually have to practice.
Mm,
Because when you show up to game day, sales is kind of weird because a lot of people just show up to the
yeah.
calls and they expect to be good. But you can't just show up to game day and expect to win the game.
Mhm.
You got to show up to practice. So we're going to force them to practice to become better and to achieve a certain level of mastery.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, it's like with anything, the more you practice it, the more comfortable you're gonna be with it and the better you're gonna get at it. Like, I mean, wish I had recordings of some of my first few sales calls. They were probably a hot mess compared to how I'm able to move through those conversations now. So you mentioned working through objections, which I think is a big fear that a lot of people have, right? What am I supposed to say if someone says they can't afford it or they want time to think about it? So what recommendations do you have for addressing those objections that might come up?
Yeah, good question. So the first thing we have to understand about objections is they're a defense mechanism typically because someone doesn't want to buy from you, but they're being nice
Mhm.
to you. So then when we try to strong arm them and fight them over it at the end of the call, you're ruining that relationship. They just want to get off the call, but for whatever reason, they're still being
Yeah.
nice to you. So what you have to do is recognize what we call becoming a challenging leader. And what that means is if someone starts rambling on and they say, oh yeah, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it, but I don't really know if I understand. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you just said? Or, yeah, I'm totally in. I want to buy this thing. Hold on a second. I mean, I'd love to maybe have you in the program, but what makes you really want to be in? Are you sure this is for
Mm,
you? Or after the pitch, like, hey, so this is what we would do. This is what we would do. Does that make sense for you? Yeah, totally. Well, why though? Why would that even make sense for you?
mm,
So we ask a lot of questions there to unleash uncertainty, and then what they do is I don't have to say anything. I just ask the question. And then they sell themselves to me. Well, I need it because of this and that and this and that and this and because of that. And if this happens, gotcha. That sounds pretty serious. But like on a scale of 1 to 10, why?
yeah.
Why does this even matter? Oh, it's a 9. Wow, that's pretty high. Why not lower? Why not like a 2? So I consistently want to attack that idea of I want to think about it or I don't know, because what I want to do is move that person to a place to where they sell themselves on why they need it, and I just ask questions to move them along the way. And so for lack of a better term, that's how we solve I want to think
Mm.
about it. And there's also the other two objections we chat about it earlier.
Yeah. So, any advice that you have? Because I feel like there's a difference between someone saying, "Oh, I can't afford it," or "Let me think about it," because they, like you said, it's a no, but they just don't want to say that to your face, versus it's something that maybe is a big investment for them and it is right for them, but they're just a little bit hesitant or scared to make that investment. So, how do you handle or how do you decipher between those two things, and how do you approach those? Do you approach them differently, or do you handle them in that same way that you just dove into?
Yeah, good question. So we want to handle uncertainty through what I just
Mm-hmm.
talked about, challenging them, but we want to look at finances a little bit differently. And the first thing I have to say about finances is if we're afraid to talk about money, we're not ready to accept
Mm-hmm.
money. If you're afraid of money, you're not in a position to gain any sort of wealth at this point because usually if we're afraid to talk about money, it's our own insecurities associated with money. And so that's the first thing. You have to look in the mirror and say, why am I afraid of money? What makes this me nervous to talk
Mm-hmm.
about this, and really ask yourself and really analyze what's going on, because in our process what we do is in discovery in the beginning we get a clear picture of finances. We're not afraid to talk about money because it's a challenging thing to talk about a lot. Maybe some people are uncomfortable, but you're also challenging someone's coachability. If they won't talk about money, they're going to be a problematic client down the road because they're going to have a problem opening up to
Mm-hmm.
you and having these hard combos. So when we talk to someone about money to uncover this, we ask about what they make, what they take home at the end of the day, what they have after taxes and bills, what their credit situation looks like. So then when we get to the pitch, I already know and recognize and understand if they can afford it, what kind of payment plan they're going to need, or if they can afford it, I can turn them away. Like, hey, you told me this thing's this much. You told me you only have like $100 left over
Mm-hmm.
each month. I just don't see a clear picture on how this
Yeah,
connects.
that's interesting. And I know talking about money is something that I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with. So have you noticed any common reasons why that is and why some of us maybe are afraid to talk about money or feel uncomfortable talking about it in the context of a sales conversation?
Yeah, I think the reason a lot of us don't like money or like talking about money, it comes from childhood, the way we grow up. Either people who grow up with little to no money and they didn't have it, so they're afraid of it, or people grew up in a place to where they were taught that money
Mm,
is evil. And so talking about money is evil. Everything associated with money is evil. So now as an adult, they manifest that and that's a
yeah.
trigger. And in the idea of cognitive behavior therapy or cognitive behavior coaching, that would be a core belief that they achieved as a child that's created triggers that are causing problems consistently in their life across the board.
I mean, we could dive into this forever, but I guess quickly, any tips that you have, like if you realize you're in that place where you're like, wow, I have this fear of talking about money, or I feel gross asking people for money, and that's why I'm scared to get on these sales calls. Any tips that you have for kind of overcoming that and starting to work through it?
Yeah, I think the big thing you can do is question yourself. Like I talked about in the level 5 listening concept, and this comes down to cognitive questioning. You have to ask yourself, why am I
Mm,
afraid of money? Well, because of this. Okay, well, what makes me afraid of that? Okay, well, what makes me afraid of that? And just keep asking yourself why at least 10 times. Eventually you'll uncover what the real problem and issue is. Then you take that real problem and issue. I'm afraid of money because my parents made me feel bad about money and they trained me that it
mhm,
was evil. Then you want to examine the evidence, which is another technique we use in sort of CBT. And the idea is, okay, is money evil? Well, no. Or why would it
yeah.
be evil? Well, because it could be used for evil purposes. Is money actually evil? No, it's just money. It's a thing. What happens if I ask for the money? Well, I might
Mhm,
get it. It might be a win for me. What happens if I don't? Well, it's always a lose. I'm going to lose every time. So, which scenario makes more sense for me to move
mhm.
into?
Okay. And another thing I'm curious about is, do you recommend different sales tactics for selling like a high ticket coaching program versus a lower ticket product or service?
Yeah, I do. I think if you're selling something that's over $3,000, anywhere from like the 3,000 and up range, you're probably going to have
Mm,
a phone call. It usually we have to use the concepts that I talked about here to achieve the sale in that context. If you have a cheaper product that's less than like $1,000, I would say your salesmanship needs to turn into
mm,
copy. And in my opinion, to be really good and to be masterful at sales, it's not just the spoken word, it's the
mm,
written word. And that's why in our Compassion Conversations Academy, we teach sales and copy, and we force people to become good at both because then they can sell low ticket, high ticket, any
yeah.
ticket. And so ultimately, I think the big difference is if it's low ticket, it's going to be on a sales page. It might be on a video sales letter. If it's high ticket, it's going to be on a phone call. And so you have to be good at both domains to ultimately be good at selling everything across the board.
That's such a good tip. Okay. And something that we were talking about before we started recording, I know that most of my audience are women, and there can be this traditional idea that selling is like a man's role. It's this masculine, hard, pushy thing. So how has that role of selling changed, and how can women, or what skills do we have as women that can make us really good at selling?
Yeah, good question. In my opinion, women are better at sales. I would hire a woman over a man
Mhm.
every day of the week because they always consistently
Mm.
outperform. And I think it's because women come off as I guess they come off as less aggressive on the phone. They're better they listen really well. They respond in kind. When you're chatting with a woman, you typically get less talking, more listening, and they ask strategic questions. Just I don't know, maybe accidentally, but they just ask questions in a different way than
Yeah.
a guy will. Because often when a man asks a question, it's just because he's ready to respond. And these are the levels of listening that we established. Level one is like you're not even listening, you
Mhm.
don't even care. Level two is you're on your phone, not paying attention. Level three, which is typically where I think the masculine role falls into, is where you're listening, but you're only listening to respond to get your
Mm.
point across. Level four is where I think women sort of position themselves, where they're listening and waiting to respond because they have a question they want to ask, or they have a very specific thing to bring into the conversation. And I think that's why they're so good at sales in this regard. And that's why I think the new economy of sales, where it's relationship driven, women are and will dominate. I know I'd rather have a team full of women than men on my
Yeah,
sales
that's
team.
so interesting, and I hope all of you introverted women who are listening, heard that, because I it's funny how we see sales as, like, this extroverted man is probably what you picture in your head, right? It's like the car salesman or whatever, but what you're saying is that introverts and women are actually some of the best salespeople because of those qualities we have. We listen, we're maybe more empathetic. And so why do you think that is? And you mentioned the landscape of sales changing. Where do you see it going in the future?
Yeah, I think where we're headed with the landscape of sales is to a relationship driven economy, to where salespeople are listeners. They're more advisors than they are
Mhm.
salespeople. And I think the ones that can position themselves in that regard are going to be the ones that win. And the interesting thing about that is if you move into this relationship dynamic, you not only get more sales up front, we see 2 to 3 times people's close rates go. We see them increase their close rates by 2 to 3 times. But what's more interesting is the people who don't close or enroll, or whatever term we use,
Mm,
come back. And in typical sales, what happens is they tell you, well, if they don't buy on that
yeah.
call, they're never coming back. But in our role, people start coming back by the dozens, and it turns into this snowball impact where all of a sudden you have this pipeline of people in your relationship driven system that are coming back over and over and over again. So you can start to use that as a source of revenue. And then it becomes less dependent on front
Mm.
end marketing. And you create this system to where you now have a consistent flow and stream of people who are already sort of
Yeah,
pre
that's such
sold.
a good point too. I always say like a no right now isn't necessarily a no forever. So it's interesting that you mentioned people coming back, because I've actually had that happen more than once in my business where I talk to someone who seems like a potential client. It's not the right fit at that time, and then 6 months later they send me a message and end up signing up for coaching, right? And I think that, like you said, really is that power of building a relationship with them, because they don't feel like, oh, you were only talking to them because you wanted to close that sale and then they said no, so you don't care about them anymore. Yeah.
Exactly. They feel good about it. They get off the phone and they're like, wow, Chandler
Mhm.
wasn't a jerk. He wasn't just here to sell me. He let me off that call and he didn't fight me for an
Yeah.
hour over
Yeah,
objections.
definitely. In your opinion, what is the number one most important thing when it comes to effective selling?
I think the biggest thing that you can do is
Mm.
ask strategic questions. Anything someone says, ask a question about. And if you can do that and your conversation is, I want to lose weight. Oh, cool. That makes sense. And I have this concept of stroke their ego and validate their concern. Oh, yeah,
Mhm.
totally makes sense. Losing weight's a big goal that we see often. And then reverse with the question. So what makes losing 10 pounds important to you? Like, why 10 pounds? Why right now? And then you keep asking why. I think if you just do that, if you just screw everything else up and you just ask good questions with a purpose and intent, you can lead someone to understanding what their truth
So
is.
good. Okay, do you have a certain structure that you've seen to be really effective when it comes to a sales call? I would imagine it's like ask questions, give your pitch, maybe address objections from there. But any structure or kind of template of an effective sales call?
Yeah, we actually give away our entire 9-step
Oh,
framework for
all
free.
right.
If anybody wants it, it's available at 9step.cultureofcare.life. My philosophy is just
Okay.
take it, have it, use it, whatever, because then people always come
Mm,
back to us.
okay. And what did you say the link for that was?
It was 9step.cultureofcare.life, and that's the number 9step.cultureofcare.life,
Okay.
not .com. And basically, I put it on a Google Doc, and it's a sheet, and it has our entire 9-step framework. What the intro looks like, what rapport looks like, what discovery looks like, and our process looks like we have an intro. We kind of have rapport, but in my opinion, rapport is
Mhm.
built during the entire conversation. It's not just like
Yeah.
ask about sunshine and gumdrops. And then we have discovery. Then we have sort of like a wrap up, which is a good technique we got from motivational interviewing, understanding how to wrap up the discovery portion so they
Mm,
understand you were actually listening. Then we have the transition. Then we have the pitch. Then we have the button down, and the button down is sort of making sure people are affirming them that they made a good decision, making sure that they're not uncomfortable, and making sure everything is in
okay,
the right
perfect.
place.
I will link that in the show notes for you guys. Definitely go check that out. That's super helpful to have. Chandler, any final advice that you have for the listeners who are new in their business? Maybe they've struggled with signing clients or they're just kind of afraid to get started because they don't want to be that salesy, pushy person when they're promoting their business.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing you can learn from this is number one, fail forward. It's okay to screw up. It's okay to not do things right. But number two, take the
Mhm.
pressure off yourself. Stop trying to sell and start trying
Mm,
to serve. Just look at people in the eye, be yourself, be who you are as a coach. Show them that you are capable of understanding their problems and issues, and that you are capable of respecting and reacting to what they're saying, and they'll magically want to sign up with you. It doesn't have to be this magical process. It doesn't have to be this pressure based sales. Take the pressure off yourself and just be who you are, and ask these questions, and
I
magic
love that. I
happens.
actually just thought of one other question before we wrap up. Is there anything that we can do in our marketing, right? So on social media or our website, our landing pages, to make that sales conversation easier once we get on the phone with someone?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that you can do in your marketing, number one, if you're not good at copy, figure out a way to get better at copy, because marketing in my opinion, is less about fancy marketing and features and benefits and more about tapping into people's pains, problems, and issues, like deep seated pains that you would figure out on a sales call in marketing works really well. Then the second thing that we have to do to make our sales process
Mm,
easier is remove fear. If there's any sort of fear or uncertainty, people aren't going to show up or they're not going to buy. So when someone opts into a sales conversation with us, we'll send them a list of videos like, hey, here's who I am. Here's exactly how this conversation is going to flow. So there's no
mm,
fear or uncertainty there. Here's what you need to be prepared for. Here's some of the common things that we hear. So that way they not only get that information, but they see
mhm.
your face multiple times. And then we'll send them little text messages. Hey, looking forward to seeing you soon, or whatever. There's like 3 or 4 text messages we'll use to get them primed before the call, and we'll include videos. Sometimes we'll have like little selfies we'll send them. I think one of the cool things you can do to make the sales process more bearable for people is to show them that you're human. Remove fear, remove uncertainty, and remove doubt, and they'll start showing up. It's not a crazy magical formula, but sit down and say, if I remove, what can I do to remove
Yeah.
fear from this equation? What can I do to make people feel like I'm not just going
Mm,
to try to take
so
their money?
good. And there was a book, I've mentioned this on the podcast before because I literally recommend it all the time. But someone recommended this book to me when I first started my business. It's like the shortest book you'll ever read. It's like $5 on Amazon, and it's literally called This Book Will Teach You How to Write Better. And it goes over like how to write
Boom.
effective copy, and different structures you can use. And I use it to this day every day in my business. So I'll link that in the show notes for you guys as well if you want to get that book. I cannot recommend it enough. And Chandler, where can the listeners find you if they want to get connected with you or learn more about compassion conversations?
Yeah, basically 2 fronts. Well, 3 fronts. If you want our 9-step framework, just go to 9step.cultureofcare.life, not .com, .life. And what that'll do is you'll put your info in, and then you will get directed to our Facebook group. And inside the Facebook group, there's like
Mm.
250 videos or something you can watch. You could get lost in there forever. And we'll also email you the 9 steps so
Okay.
you get that at the same time. And if you notice what I just did, I made that clear to remove fear and
Mm-hmm.
uncertainty from the equation. And then if you want to connect with me personally, just go to Instagram.com/Chandler underscore SAF. I think my profile picture is me with a
Yeah.
surfboard and my little daughter and like a little tutu. We were surfing. So connect with me there. And if you want to watch videos, I put out new videos like 3 or 4 times a week on YouTube. So youtube.com/Chandler Walker SAF. Chandler like from Friends, Walker like the Texas Ranger,
I
SAF means
love it.
Stone
All
Age
right,
Fuel.
I'll link all that in the show notes for you guys. Chandler, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of this. It was so good. And I know the listeners who struggle with selling, hopefully they took some notes.
Exactly. Notes
All
are
right.
king.
Thank you again, Chandler.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hopefully, gave y'all some value and take the pressure off yourself. Get out there and just have fun in the process. Be you, and people will become attracted to who you are.